Hi everyone, my name is Anthony Cummins. Get yourself a copy of Book of Bushido. You'll find a link in the description, in the pinned comment below. But the question is Torei. When you hold the sword and you bow to it, why? Now, I don't have an answer to this, and I'm on a quest to find out the truth behind the Japanese sword, Japanese swordsmanship, and basically how the samurai connected with their sword. And one thing we constantly see or hear is bow to your sword. But no matter where I look in history, I don't seem to really be able to find it, to be honest. I'm not saying it's not there, it could be there, but it doesn't pop up. It's not as ubiquitous as we see. So I bought one katana in my life, an antique katana, and I went to a shop in Liverpool, England, and he gave me the sword when I bought it, and he bowed to it, and I sort of awkwardly well, okay, bow back to this sword, why are we bowing to a sword? And I've never understood why we bow to a sword. Now, you might jump to the conclusion and say, oh, it's respect, it's this is dojo respect and all that. I'm not talking about today. We have traditions today where we bow to the sword, and that's through respect for the dojo and all that. I'm not saying that's not a positive thing to do. What I'm saying is, where did we get it from? So, I've got a question for Gun Samurai. Gun Samurai, or Samurai Gun Samurai, I think. I always get him mixed up. It's Matthew Okuhara. So I always get them mixed up the wrong way around. So basically, do samurai lift the guns and bow to guns? Question for samurai archers out there. Does samurai bow to a bow? What about to a wakizashi? What about to a club with the studs in it? What about to the fan with the dagger in it? No? When people say, hold on, isn't the soul of the sword samurai in the sword? Well, no, that's a myth. That's a later thing that came about. So I'm not saying this bowing to the sword is not Edo period. It probably is. The only time I've ever found anything that resembles bowing to a sword is from a document which is from one of my translations with one of my team's translations in the Book of Samurai series, and it says if you accidentally nudge someone's sword you're sat next to, you lift up and bow. But it appears that you pick up their sword and bow. But I found a 16th century account which says they actually just lift up, like imagine they're lifting up if they knock a sword. So like this. Sorry, apologies, sort of like, sorry. We don't know exactly where the hands go, but the idea is you probably don't pick up the sword, even though it says it in the text. It's more like you symbolically pick up the sword, go in the side, and then there's no fight. Okay, that's the only one. And I can't find it anywhere where anyone says, when you use a sword, bow to it. It says inspect it, respect it, be nice to it. Not only that, like I've said many times before, you actually really are quite brutal with a katana. So here's some historical facts for you. Facts. You got moleskin with like rock in it, small little chips of rock, and when you want to sharpen it on the road, you sharpen it like that. It cleans the blood off, sharpens it. So samurai swords probably had lots of sharpened little, scratches all along it. That's a fact. And when a samurai had bent their sword in combat or something, they used to just hammer it down. So this idea of the sword being this prestigious object where you don't breathe on it is very much a later thing. So there are times you would bow to a sword, and that is when it is being dedicated to a shrine. When a sword is being made and it becomes a holy object in a shrine, then you're bowing to it. But this, if you take that out of context, it doesn't work, because if you put in there some flowers that are holy, or a rock that's a holy, or a mirror, the holy object becomes something you bow to. Now, I've been discussing this in depth with Stephen Nojiri from Tada Genji Traditions. Make sure you go and follow him. And me and Stephen are trying to get to the bottom of this idea of the sword being spiritual. And the only thing that we can think of is swords are often dedicated to shrines, and people do bow to them in religious context. When the sword is not a sword used at your side, it's a sword created, it's never sort of used for war, it's polished and put on an altar, and it's there, and it represents the spirit of war. Now, I jumped to the conclusion of Hachiman, the samurai god, but Stephen's saying Hachiman is pretty much a bow. And my question is, did the bow then evolve into sword, and did we have late Edo period Hachiman sword instead of bow? Maybe, maybe not. We don't pick up the spear, the yari. Have you ever seen anyone pick up a yari and bow to it? Never. So it seems really strange that everybody picks up the sword and bows. Nobody picks up a wakizashi, a gun, a spear, a yumi bow, a shuriken, a fan with a dagger in it. Nobody does it. But for a sword, everybody starts bowing, and everybody gets a bit crazy if you don't bow to the sword. And I don't bow to swords. I will do it if it's going to create an awkward situation. Oh, yeah, very good. But it's like, I'm not bowing to my knife and fork. I'm not bowing to the chip fryer. Do you know what I mean? It's clearly important to the samurai to have a sword, but farmers had swords. Yes, they did. Fact, farmers had swords throughout most of the samurai period. Even servants would probably carry a short sword, yeah? Most people have some sort of dagger, sword, on them, blade. But long, tachi style, uchigatana length stuff absolutely exists in a farmer's world for most of samurai history. So, and if you don't believe me, what did Hideyoshi take off the peasants if it was not swords, daggers, spears, guns? So, question, why, where, there's a gap. You go back to 20th century Japan, everybody's bowing to swords, people buying and selling swords are bowing to them, everybody's bowing to a sword, but then you get this grey period in the Edo period where you're like, did they or did not? Then there's clearly the Sengoku period where people are like, there is just no mention of bowing to swords. However, I'm not saying, well, there's no mention that's been found. So I'm asking you, can we find it? Where does it come from? Why are we bowing to swords? What do you think? It's called Torei, so sword, politeness, sword, respect. It's a difficult one, that. But so, Reiho, the way of Rei, the politeness, the ceremonial ritual stuff, yeah? So Torei, sword bowing, I'm assuming. So, let me know what you think. I've done this discussion in connection with Stephen Nojiri from Tada Genji. I'd like to ask other people such as Gun Samurai, does anybody bow to anything else? Does anybody know any historical reason for why, where or how we came about to bow to swords when we don't bow to anything else? And I can't seem to see it in the general English translations of medieval documents. Yeah, not saying it doesn't exist, it's just within the English translation of medieval documents, it doesn't seem to be there. And you can't really find much on a few pages Google search on where it came about. Your answers below would be superb. Click the top link to my book.